check the trunk. My badge is in the jacket.
On a humid Thursday evening in Clayton County, Georgia, two patrol officers made a decision that would shatter their careers and expose the kind of prejudice that festers beneath the surface of institutions sworn to serve and protect. What they did not know, what they could not have anticipated, was that the man they chose to humiliate that night wore the same oath they had taken. He carried the same commitment to justice, and unlike them, he had spent 17 years proving it. This is a story about what happens when assumption replaces procedure, when bias blinds those who should see most clearly, and when the uniform becomes nothing more than a costume for those who never understood its meaning. If you have ever wondered whether the system can correct itself, whether accountability is possible when power is abused, stay with me until the end. This story might restore something you thought was lost, or it might confirm your deepest fears. Either way, you deserve to know what happened on Magnolia Ridge Road. Before we continue, if stories like this matter to you, if you believe in holding power accountable and amplifying voices that deserve to be heard, consider subscribing. We tell the stories others overlook, and your support helps us keep doing exactly that. The afternoon had been ordinary in the way that Clayton County afternoons tend to be in late September. The heat had not yet surrendered to autumn, and the air carried that particular heaviness that makes everything feel slightly slower, slightly more deliberate. Deputy Terrence Washington had finished his shift at the county sheriff's office at 4:30, changed out of his uniform in the locker room, and exchanged brief words with a few colleagues before walking to his personal vehicle in the employee lot. Terrence was 41 years old, 17 years with the Clayton County Sheriff's Department. He had worked patrol, investigations, court security, and for the past 3 years had served on a specialized task force coordinating with federal agencies on cross-jurisdictional cases. He was the kind of deputy that younger officers sought out for advice, the kind who remembered names and faces and case details that others forgot within weeks. His service record was exemplary. Not perfect in the sense that some administrators preferred, all smiles and compliance, but perfect in the sense that mattered. He did the job right. He treated people with dignity. He had never once discharged his weapon in the line of duty, a fact he considered a point of professional pride. On this particular Thursday, Terrence had a simple errand. His daughter's 16th birthday was approaching, and he needed to pick up a gift he had ordered from an electronics store across town. The route took him through Evergreen, a predominantly white suburb that bordered the more diverse neighborhoods where Terrence had grown up and still lived. He had driven through Evergreen countless times. It was simply geography, nothing more. A stretch of road between where he was and where he needed to be. His vehicle was a dark blue Chevrolet Tahoe, 3 years old, well-maintained. The plates were current. The registration was valid. The insurance was paid. There was nothing about the vehicle that would attract attention from anyone who was actually looking at the vehicle. The windows were not illegally tinted. There were no equipment violations. The brake lights worked. The turn signals functioned. Terrence had checked them himself just 2 weeks earlier, the kind of habitual vigilance that came from years of understanding how easily a minor defect could become an excuse. He turned onto Magnolia Ridge Road at approximately 5:15 in the evening. The sun was still bright, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns that lined both sides of the street. Sprinklers ticked back and forth in rhythmic arcs. A woman walked a golden retriever on the sidewalk. 2 children rode bicycles near a cul-de-sac ahead. It was the picture of suburban tranquility, the kind of neighborhood that appeared in real estate advertisements and television shows about comfortable American life. Terrence noticed the patrol car within 30 seconds of making his turn. It was parked on a side street, angled in a way that suggested the officers inside were watching the main road rather than the residential area behind them. He recognized the posture. He had sat in exactly that position hundreds of times himself, watching traffic, waiting for something that triggered instinct or protocol. He thought nothing of it. He was not speeding. He had committed no violation. He was simply driving. What he did not know, what he could not see from his position, was the conversation happening inside that patrol car. Officer Derek Morrison had been with the Evergreen Police Department for 4 years. He was 32 years old, confident in the way that young officers sometimes become when they mistake aggression for competence. His partner, Officer Nathan Crane, was 29, with 2 years on the force. They had been assigned to routine patrol, tasked with nothing more significant than maintaining a visible presence and responding to calls as they came. The afternoon had been quiet, no incidents worth mentioning, the kind of shift that either relaxes officers or makes them restless, depending on their temperament. Morrison watched the dark blue Tahoe turn onto Magnolia Ridge Road. He watched it maintain a steady speed, observed the driver through the windshield. He noted the driver's race before he noted anything else. This was not conscious, or perhaps it was. The distinction matters less than the outcome. The driver was a black man. The vehicle was expensive. The neighborhood was evergreen. Those 3 facts arranged themselves in Morrison's mind into a conclusion that had nothing to do with evidence and everything to do with assumption. Something about the situation felt wrong to him. He would later struggle to articulate exactly what that something was, but in the moment, he did not hesitate. He did not question. He simply acted. Morrison pulled the patrol car onto Magnolia Ridge Road and began following the Tahoe at a distance of approximately 50 yards. Crane glanced over, but said nothing. He had learned in his 2 years that questioning Morrison rarely led anywhere productive. Morrison had opinions, strong ones, and he did not appreciate having them challenged. Terrence noticed the patrol car behind him almost immediately. He adjusted his speed slightly, ensuring he was traveling exactly at the posted limit. He checked his mirrors. He kept both hands visible on the steering wheel. These were not conscious decisions. They were reflexes, ingrained through years of experience and through something deeper, something that every black man in America understands without needing it explained. He was being watched. He was being measured. He needed to give them nothing. The patrol car followed for 3 blocks, then 4, then 5. Terrence's jaw tightened. He knew this pattern. He had seen it from the other side, had participated in surveillance that served legitimate investigative purposes, but he also knew when surveillance crossed the line into something else, when following became harassment, when attention became targeting. He turned right onto Willow Creek Lane. The patrol car turned right. He turned left onto Birchwood Avenue. The patrol car turned left. He was being tailed. There was no longer any question, and he had done nothing wrong. The lights came on at 5:23. Red and blue flashing in his rearview mirror. The brief chirp of a siren. Terrence felt something cold settle in his stomach. It was not fear, exactly. It was something closer to resignation. A weariness that came from knowing what was about to happen and knowing that there was nothing he could do to prevent it. He pulled to the side of the road, stopping in front of a house with white columns and a circular driveway. He put the vehicle in park. He turned off the engine. He placed both hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, fingers spread, visible. He waited. Behind him, Morrison and Crane exited their vehicle in a manner that Terrence immediately recognized as unnecessarily aggressive. They approached from both sides, hands on their weapons, bodies tensed as if expecting confrontation. Morrison came to the driver's side window. Crane positioned himself near the rear passenger door, hand resting on his holstered firearm. Morrison did not introduce himself. He did not explain the reason for the stop. He simply stared at Terrence for a long moment, his expression a mixture of suspicion and something that looked uncomfortably like satisfaction. License and registration. The words were not a request. They were a command, delivered in a tone that suggested Terrence had already committed some offense simply by existing in this space. Terrence kept his hands on the wheel. Before I reach for anything, I want you to know that I am a deputy sheriff with Clayton County. My badge and credentials are in my jacket pocket. My service weapon is secured in a lockbox in the rear compartment. He spoke clearly, calmly, the way he had spoken to countless citizens during his own traffic stops. Transparency, communication, ensuring that everyone understood the situation before any movement occurred. Morrison's expression did not change. He did not acknowledge the information. He did not respond at all. He simply repeated his command, slower this time, as if speaking to someone who might not understand English. License and registration. Terrence felt the cold in his stomach spread. He had given this officer crucial information, the kind of information that should have immediately changed the nature of the interaction. Instead, it had been ignored, dismissed, as if it had never been spoken at all. "I am reaching for my wallet now," Terrence said. He moved slowly, telegraphing every motion. His wallet was in his back pocket. He shifted slightly, retrieved it, and removed his driver's license. Then he reached across to the glove compartment, aware of Crane watching his every movement from the other side of the vehicle, and removed the registration and insurance documents. He handed them through the window. Morrison took them without a word and returned to the patrol car. Terrence sat in silence. His hands returned to the steering wheel. His eyes moved between his mirrors, tracking Morrison's position, monitoring Crane, who had not moved from his post near the rear of the vehicle. The suburban street continued its peaceful existence around them. A sprinkler system activated nearby. A car passed in the opposite direction, its driver craning to look at the scene unfolding. Think about this moment. Think about what it means to be sitting in your own vehicle, having committed no offense, being treated as a suspect by people who wear the same kind of badge you do. Think about what it must feel like to know the procedures, to understand the protocols, to recognize every deviation from proper conduct, and to be powerless to do anything about it. If you have experienced something similar, share your story in the comments. Your voice matters. Your experience deserves to be heard. 3 minutes passed, then 5. Terrence remained still, but his mind was active. He was cataloging, documenting, building a mental timeline that would become important later. He knew his plates would come back clean. He knew his license would show no violations. He knew there was no legitimate reason for this stop, and he was already preparing for what would come next. Morrison returned to the window. His partner remained in position. Their body language had not relaxed. If anything, Crane seemed more tense. His weight shifted forward, his hand still hovering near his weapon. "Step out of the vehicle." The command hit Terrence like a physical blow. Not because it was unexpected, but because of what it represented. Escalation without cause. Authority exercised without justification. The transformation of a traffic stop into something more threatening, more dangerous, for no reason whatsoever. May I ask why? Terrence kept his voice neutral, professional. He was not challenging. He was asking for information that he was legally entitled to receive. Morrison did not answer. He repeated the command louder this time. "Step out of the vehicle." "Now." "I told you," Terrence said, and there was steel beneath the calm now, something that came from 17 years of dealing with exactly this kind of situation from the other side. "I am a deputy sheriff. I have identified myself. I have complied with your requests. You have not given me any reason for this stop. You have not told me why you are asking me to exit my vehicle. I am entitled to that information." For a moment, something flickered across Morrison's face. Not doubt exactly, more like irritation, the look of someone who expected compliance and was encountering something unexpected instead. Resistance, questions, a citizen who knew his rights, but instead of reconsidering, instead of doing what any properly trained officer should do in that situation, Morrison doubled down. He reached for the door handle. He pulled it open, and then he put his hand on Terrence's arm. "Out, now. Don't make this worse than it needs to be." Terrence stepped out of the vehicle, not because he accepted the legitimacy of the command, but because he understood what refusing would mean. He understood how quickly situations like this could spiral, how a black man resisting, even lawfully, even rightfully, could end up injured, or worse. He stood beside his Tahoe, hands visible facing Officer Morrison. He was taller than the officer by several inches, broader in the shoulders. He could see how that physical presence registered in Morrison's eyes, how it seemed to confirm something the officer had already decided. "Turn around," hands on the vehicle. Terrence did not move. His voice remained level, but there was an edge to it now, something that came from years of discipline pushed to its limit. "I have told you twice that I am a law enforcement officer. I have offered to show you my credentials. You have not run my plates because if you had, you would know that this vehicle is registered to a deputy sheriff. You have not told me why I was stopped, and now you are asking me to assume a position of detention without cause. Tell me what I am being accused of." Morrison stepped closer, too close, inside the boundary of professional distance. His voice dropped, but the threat in it was unmistakable. "I don't know who you think you are, but in this neighborhood, when I tell you to do something, you do it. We've had reports of suspicious vehicles in this area. Your vehicle matches the description." This was a lie. Terrence knew it instantly. There had been no reports. There was no suspicious vehicle. This was pretext, nothing more. A convenient fiction constructed to justify what had already been decided. "What description would that be?" Terrence asked. "Dark-colored SUV? In a suburb where every other driveway has a dark-colored SUV? Or does the description also include the race of the driver?" The question hung in the air between them. Morrison's face flushed. His hand moved back toward his weapon. Crane, still positioned at the rear of the vehicle, took a step closer. "That's it!" Morrison's voice was tight with anger. "Turn around. You're being detained for obstruction and failure to comply with a lawful order." Terrence did not turn around. He held Morrison's gaze. "There has been no lawful order because there has been no lawful basis for this stop. I know the law. I enforce it. You have not articulated a single reason why you pulled me over, and suspicious vehicle calls require specific descriptions, not just any black man in an expensive car." The words were precise, devastating, and absolutely true. But truth in that moment, on that suburban street, did not matter. What mattered was power, and Morrison had decided to exercise his. He grabbed Terrence's arm. He attempted to spin him toward the vehicle. And in that instant, instinct took over. Terrence did not resist. He did not fight, but he also did not allow himself to be thrown off balance. He planted his feet and remained stable, not aggressive, but not yielding either. Crane was there in seconds. Both officers had their hands on him now. They were shouting commands. "Turn around. Stop resisting. Get on the ground." The words overlapped, contradictory, impossible to follow, even if Terrence had wanted to comply. He did not resist. Let that be absolutely clear. He allowed them to push him against the side of his vehicle. He allowed them to pull his arms behind his back. But he did not stop speaking. "This is illegal. This is an unlawful detention. My credentials are in my jacket. I am Deputy Terrence Washington, badge number 7431. Check your system. Call your supervisor. You are making a mistake that will end your careers." Morrison cinched the handcuffs tight. Too tight. Terrence felt the metal bite into his wrists. He felt the heat of the vehicle against his chest where they pressed him. He felt, more than anything, a fury that he kept contained through nothing but sheer force of will. "Stop with the deputy act," Morrison said. He was breathing hard, as if the minimal physical exertion had exhausted him. Or maybe it was something else. Maybe it was the adrenaline of what he was doing, the rush of power over another human being. "We're going to search this vehicle, and then we're going to find out exactly who you really are." This is the moment where everything could have changed. This is where Morrison could have paused, where he could have considered the possibility that he was wrong, where professionalism could have reasserted itself over prejudice. But it did not happen. He nodded to Crane, and Crane moved toward the passenger door of the Tahoe. "If you search that vehicle without consent or probable cause," Terrence said, "you are committing an illegal search. Everything you find will be inadmissible. And given that what you will find is Sheriff's Department equipment with my name on it, you are also about to destroy any defense you might have for what you have already done." Crane hesitated, just for a moment. There was something in his eyes that suggested he was processing what Terrence had said, that some part of him understood they had gone too far. But Morrison was not hesitating. Morrison was committed. "Search it," he said. Crane opened the door. The interior of Terrence's vehicle was exactly what you would expect from a veteran law enforcement officer, clean, organized. In the back seat, a gym bag with workout clothes. On the floor, a case of water bottles. In the rear compartment, the lockbox Terrence had mentioned, secured with a combination lock containing his off-duty weapon. And next to that lockbox, folded neatly, was his Sheriff's Department jacket, complete with badge, nameplate, and the distinctive insignia of the Clayton County Tactical Unit. Crane found it within 90 seconds. He stood at the rear of the vehicle, holding the jacket, reading the name embroidered on it, looking at the badge pinned to the chest. And then he turned toward Morrison, and his face held an expression that mixed fear with dawning realization. "Derek," he said. His voice had changed. The aggression was gone. What remained was something much smaller. "Derek, you need to see this." Morrison walked to the back of the vehicle. He looked at the jacket. He looked at the badge. He looked at the name. Washington. The same name as the driver's license he had taken. The same name that was now burned into his immediate future. For several long seconds, neither officer spoke. The suburban street remained quiet. The sprinklers continued their rhythm. Somewhere, a lawnmower started up. Life went on around them as if nothing significant had occurred, as if two officers had not just destroyed their own careers through prejudice and arrogance. Terrence turned his head, still pressed against his vehicle, wrists still bound in cuffs that were still too tight. He could see their faces. He could see the moment understanding arrived. And he could see that understanding came too late to undo anything. "Now do you believe me?" His voice was quiet now, not triumphant, not angry, just tired in a way that went deeper than this single incident, that encompassed every time he had been stopped, questioned, suspected, doubted, tired of a world where the badge he had earned through years of service meant nothing compared to the color of his skin. This scenario plays out across America more often than most people want to believe. Officers who should protect instead profile, systems meant to serve instead surveil, and people who wear the same uniform, who took the same oath, who served the same communities, find themselves on opposite sides of an encounter that should never have happened. Let me know in the comments what you think about what Morrison and Crane did. Have you ever witnessed something similar? Have you experienced it yourself? Morrison did not apologize. He did not remove the handcuffs. Instead, he made a calculation, visible in his eyes, about how to salvage the situation, about how to construct a narrative that might protect him. "We didn't know," he said. "You should have been clearer. You were being uncooperative. Even now, even with the evidence in his hands." He was attempting to shift blame. Terrence felt something harden inside him. "I told you twice that I was law enforcement. I offered to show my credentials. You refused to verify my identity. You refused to explain the reason for the stop. You detained me without cause. You searched my vehicle without consent or warrant. And now you're standing there, holding proof of everything I said. And your response is that I should have been clearer." The words hung in the humid evening air. Morrison's jaw worked, but no sound came out. Crane stood frozen, the jacket still in his hands, looking like a man who had just realized the ground beneath him was no longer solid. And then, from the end of the street, another vehicle appeared, a dark sedan, unmarked but unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. It moved slowly, deliberately, and came to a stop directly behind the Evergreen patrol car. The door opened, and a man stepped out. Inspector Harold Simmons was 54 years old. 26 years with the Evergreen Police Department, the last 8 in internal affairs. He was known throughout the department as someone who took his role seriously, perhaps too seriously for some officers' comfort. He did not look for reasons to excuse misconduct. He looked for truth, wherever it led. On this particular evening, he had been monitoring the radio traffic when the stop was initiated. He had heard the vehicle description, he had recognized the plates, and he had known immediately that something was wrong. Deputy Washington was known to him. They had worked together on a joint investigation 2 years earlier. The idea that Terrence Washington was driving a suspicious vehicle in Evergreen was absurd, but he had not intervened immediately. He had listened. He had waited. He had given officers Morrison and Crane every opportunity to recognize their mistake and correct it. They had not. Simmons walked toward the scene with the unhurried pace of a man who has seen enough to know that speed rarely improves situations like this. He took in the tableau. Terrence Washington in handcuffs, pressed against his own vehicle. Morrison and Crane frozen in obvious distress. The sheriff's department jacket lying across the back of the Tahoe like an accusation. He stopped several feet away. His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of authority that came not from volume, but from certainty. "Officers, would either of you like to explain to me why Deputy Washington of the Clayton County Sheriff's Department is currently in handcuffs beside his own vehicle?" The question was not really a question. It was an indictment framed as an inquiry. Morrison started to speak. "Inspector, we received reports of a suspicious Simmons," raised one hand. That was enough to stop the words. "Did you run the plates on this vehicle before initiating the stop?" Silence. "Did you verify the registration?" More silence. "Did you contact dispatch to confirm the alleged suspicious vehicle report, or did you simply follow a black man through a white neighborhood until you decided you had probable cause?" The silence that followed that question was different. It was the silence of men who understood finally that there would be no talking their way out of this. Simmons turned to Terrence. "Deputy Washington, I apologize, not on behalf of these officers because what they did does not represent this department, but I apologize that you were subjected to this." Terrence looked at him. The exhaustion in his eyes was profound, but there was something else there too. Recognition, understanding between two professionals who both knew what should have happened and what actually did. The apology means more than you know, Inspector, but right now, I would like these handcuffs removed, and then I would like to file a formal complaint. Simmons nodded. He turned to Morrison. Remove the restraints. Now. Morrison's hands were shaking as he unlocked the cuffs. Whether it was anger, fear, or some combination of both was impossible to say. The metal fell away from Terrence's wrists, leaving red marks that would darken into bruises by morning. Terrence turned to face the two officers who had detained him. He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He simply looked at them, and in that look was everything they had refused to see. "I have worn this badge for 17 years, he said. "I have served communities that look like me, and communities that don't. I have treated every person I encountered with the dignity they deserved, regardless of how they looked, or where they lived, or what I might have assumed about them, because that is what the oath means. That is what the uniform demands. It is not a costume. It is not a license to exercise power over people you decide don't belong. It is a responsibility. And you both failed it today." Neither officer spoke. There was nothing they could say. Simmons moved closer to them. His voice was quiet, but it carried clearly. "Both of you will return to the station immediately. You will surrender your badges and weapons pending investigation. You will not discuss this incident with anyone outside of the investigative process. And you will understand that what happened here tonight will be examined thoroughly, completely, and without any attempt to minimize what you did." Morrison found his voice. Finally. "Inspector, we were just doing our job. We had reason to number Simmons cut him off. You had assumption. You had bias. You had a black man in a neighborhood where you decided he didn't belong, and you constructed a justification after the fact. That is not police work. That is profiling. And it ends now." The next hour unfolded with the methodical precision of bureaucratic consequence. Morrison and Crane were escorted back to the Evergreen police station by a separate unit that arrived within minutes of Simmons's call. Their patrol car was impounded as evidence. Their body camera footage was secured. Statements were taken from witnesses who had gathered on the street, residents who had watched the scene unfold from their manicured lawns and air-conditioned windows. Terrence Washington spent 3 hours providing his account of the incident. He did so with the same calm, thorough attention to detail that had made him an effective investigator. He documented the timeline. He described each violation of protocol. He explained exactly what should have happened and exactly how far reality had deviated from that standard. The internal affairs investigation that followed was not brief. It took 4 months to complete. Interviews were conducted, records were reviewed. The suspicious vehicle call that Morrison had claimed prompted the stop was traced and found to be non-existent. There had been no reports matching the description of Terrence's vehicle, no calls from concerned residents, nothing but the imagination of an officer who saw a black man where he did not expect to see one. The body camera footage was devastating. It captured everything. Morrison's refusal to acknowledge Terrence's identification as law enforcement. The escalation from traffic stop to detention without any intervening justification, the decision to search the vehicle despite explicit warning that it was unlawful, and most damning, the conversation between Morrison and Crane in their patrol car before initiating the stop captured by the dash camera, in which Morrison had said explicitly that he wanted to see what a guy like that was doing in Evergreen. A guy like that. 3 words that contained an entire history, an entire system, an entire failure of the principles that policing claims to uphold. The consequences were significant. Officer Derek Morrison was terminated from the Evergreen Police Department. His certification was revoked by the State Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission, effectively ending his law enforcement career. He faced no criminal charges, though the evidence would have supported them. The prosecutor's office determined that prosecution would be difficult given the complexities of proving intent beyond reasonable doubt. This decision was controversial. Many argued it demonstrated the very accountability gap that had allowed the incident to occur in the first place. Officer Nathan Crane received a different outcome. During the investigation, he cooperated fully. He admitted his role in the incident without qualification or excuse. He acknowledged that he had followed Morrison's lead despite recognizing that the stop lacked justification, and he expressed what appeared to be genuine remorse for his participation. Crane was suspended without pay for 60 days. He was required to complete extensive retraining, including coursework on implicit bias, constitutional law, and procedural justice. His probationary period was extended by 2 years. He was transferred to a different division away from patrol, where he would have no direct contact with the public pending demonstration that he had internalized the lessons of his failure. Whether Crane's punishment was sufficient is a question without an easy answer. Some argued he should have faced the same termination as Morrison, that following orders was not an excuse when those orders were clearly unlawful. Others believed his cooperation and apparent understanding of his wrongdoing merited the opportunity to reform. The debate continues in Evergreen and beyond, wherever communities grapple with how to hold officers accountable while also believing in the possibility of change. The Evergreen Police Department instituted new policies in response to the incident. All traffic stops would now require officers to document specific, articulable reasons before initiation. Racial and demographic information about stopped individuals would be tracked and analyzed. Supervisors would conduct regular reviews of stop patterns among their officers, looking for statistical anomalies that might indicate bias. These changes were announced at a press conference where the chief of the Evergreen Police Department stood before cameras and acknowledged that what happened to Deputy Washington should never happen to anyone. She did not make excuses. She did not minimize. She accepted institutional responsibility and outlined steps to prevent recurrence. Critics noted that similar promises had been made before in Evergreen and in countless other departments across the country. The gap between policy and practice remained wide. The gap between announcement and implementation remained wider still. Change, real change, would require more than press conferences and policy documents. It would require a fundamental shift in how officers were recruited, trained, and held accountable throughout their careers. Terrence Washington returned to duty with the Clayton County Sheriff's Department 2 weeks after the incident. He received no fanfare. He sought no attention. He simply resumed the work he had done for 17 years, serving a community that needed him, holding himself to standards that others had failed to meet. But something had shifted. Colleagues noticed it, a certain weariness that had not been there before. Not cynicism exactly. Terrence still believed in the possibility of justice, still committed himself to the principles he had always upheld. But there was a shadow now, an awareness of how fragile those principles could be, how easily they could be abandoned when bias overwhelmed training, when assumption replaced investigation. He was asked in the months that followed to speak about his experience, training academies, community forums, professional conferences. He declined most invitations, but accepted a few. When he spoke, he did not focus on his own mistreatment. He focused on what it represented. What happened to me that night happens every day across this country, he told an audience of law enforcement professionals at a regional conference 6 months after the incident. It happens to people who don't have badges in their jackets, who don't have inspector supervisors who recognize their names, who don't have the training to know exactly how far their rights extend and exactly how they're being violated. Those people don't get press conferences. They don't get policy reviews. They get records. They get suspicion. They get the accumulated weight of every assumption officers carry into every encounter, and some of them don't go home at all. The room was silent. Terrence looked out at the faces before him, some defensive, some thoughtful, some carrying the same weariness he felt. I still believe in this profession, he continued. I have to believe in it because I've dedicated my life to it. But belief is not enough. We have to be willing to look honestly at what we do, at who we stop, at why we make the decisions we make. We have to be willing to confront the parts of ourselves that make assumptions based on factors that have nothing to do with behavior or evidence or reasonable suspicion. That work is hard. It's uncomfortable. It requires admitting things about ourselves that we would rather not admit. But it's the only way forward, the only way to be worthy of the trust community's place in us. He stepped back from the podium. The applause was genuine but uncertain, the response of people who knew they had heard something true and were not entirely sure what to do with it. The story of what happened on Magnolia Ridge Road spread beyond Evergreen. Local news covered it first, then regional outlets, then national media as the broader implications became clear. The image of a veteran black sheriff's deputy handcuffed by white patrol officers who refused to believe his credentials resonated with millions who had experienced or witnessed similar treatment. Social media amplified the story. The body camera footage, released after the Internal Affairs investigation concluded, was viewed millions of times. People dissected every moment. They highlighted Morrison's dismissive tone. They noted Crane's hesitation and his failure to act on it. They pointed out every deviation from proper procedure, every instance where training should have prevailed, but prejudice prevailed instead. The conversation that followed was not comfortable. It was not neat. It did not produce easy conclusions or simple solutions, but it was necessary. It forced communities to confront questions they had avoided. It forced departments to examine practices they had accepted. It forced individuals to consider their own assumptions and their own potential to make the same mistakes Morrison and Crane had made. And in Clayton County, in the office where Terrence Washington continued to serve, his colleagues treated him with a new kind of respect, not because he had been victimized and vindicated, but because he had shown them what professionalism actually looked like, what dignity under pressure meant, what it meant to hold yourself to a standard even when others abandoned theirs. Now, as we reach the end of this story, I want to ask you something. Not about the officers who failed, not about the systems that allowed that failure, about you. Have you ever made assumptions about someone based on how they looked or where you encountered them? Have you ever followed an instinct that, when examined, was really just bias dressed up as intuition? Have you ever let what you expected to see override what was actually there? Most of us have. The difference is whether we're willing to acknowledge it, whether we're willing to do the hard work of examining our own minds, challenging our own patterns, holding ourselves accountable before someone else has to. That is the lesson of Magnolia Ridge Road. Not just that 2 officers failed, but that failure is always possible for anyone when we stop questioning ourselves and start assuming we already know what we're looking at. Terrence Washington understood that. He understood it before that evening, and he understands it even more deeply now. Every day he puts on the uniform, he carries the weight of that understanding. It makes him better at his job. It makes him more compassionate with the people he encounters. It makes him exactly the kind of officer that communities deserve. Morrison and Crane did not understand it. They thought the uniform was enough. They thought the authority was the point. And in their failure, they showed all of us what happens when power operates without principle, when assumption replaces evidence, when the badge becomes an excuse rather than a responsibility. If this story meant something to you, if it made you think about justice, accountability, or your own assumptions, consider subscribing. We tell stories like this because they matter, because the people who experience them deserve to be heard, and because understanding what goes wrong is the first step toward making things right. This is not the end of the larger story, of course. In Evergreen, the reforms are still being implemented. The culture is still shifting, slowly, imperfectly. Officers who worked alongside Morrison are asking themselves uncomfortable questions about what they knew and when they knew it. Community members are watching more closely, documenting more carefully, demanding more accountability. And across the country, in cities and suburbs and rural areas, in departments large and small, similar conversations are happening. Some will lead to change. Some will not. The arc of justice, as others have noted, is long. Whether it bends toward anything depends entirely on who is pulling it. Terrence Washington continues to serve. He will retire someday, probably in another decade or so. He will look back on a career that included that humid Thursday evening in Evergreen, that humiliation, that vindication, and he will know that he handled it the way his oath demanded, with professionalism, with dignity, with an unwavering commitment to the principles that should guide everyone who wears the badge. What happened to him should not have happened, but it did. And in the telling of it, in the examination of every moment and every failure, perhaps some small measure of good can come from it. Perhaps someone watching will recognize themselves. Perhaps someone will choose differently. Perhaps the next time an officer follows a vehicle through an unfamiliar neighborhood, they will ask themselves why. They will demand more of their own instincts. They will remember that the person in that vehicle might be a colleague, a neighbor, a fellow citizen who deserves better than assumption. That would be the real victory, Not the termination of one officer, not the suspension of another, not the policies or the press conferences or the investigations. The real victory would be a fundamental change in how we see each other, all of us, officers and citizens alike. A willingness to let evidence lead and assumption follow. A commitment to dignity that does not depend on who someone is or what they look like or where they happen to be driving. That victory is still possible. It is always possible, but it requires work. It requires honesty. It requires the kind of courage that Terrence Washington showed that evening, the courage to stand in his truth even when those with power over him refuse to see it. The road is long, the work is hard, but every story like this one, every examination of failure and consequence, brings us a little closer to what we should be. And maybe, just maybe, that is enough to keep going. The sun has set on Magnolia Ridge Road. The sprinklers have finished their cycles. The patrol car that should never have stopped there has been impounded, its equipment cataloged, its footage preserved. 2 careers have ended or been irrevocably damaged. 1 man has returned to his work, wiser but wearier, still committed to a profession that failed him in one of its representatives, but that he refuses to abandon. The story is told. The lesson is available. What happens next depends on all of us. Thank you for staying until the end. What would you have done in Terrence Washington's position? And what will you do now, knowing what you know about assumption, bias, and the long work of justice? Tell me in the comments. And if you want more stories that matter, subscribe. This is what we do. This is why we do it. We will see you next time.